Wishing you a great day. Now let us look at the physiology of reproductive system part 2. In this lecture, we will be describing about the female reproductive system. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to summarize the formation of gametes with reference to oogenesis. You'll be summarizing the uterine and ovarian cycles. You'll be discussing the control of menstrual cycle. You'll be listing the female hormones and explain the actions and regulations of these hormones. You'll be describing the process of fertilization and implantation. You'll be briefly describing the hormonal changes associated with pregnancy. Also, you'll be discussing on the hormonal changes after menopause. Female reproductive system consists of ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, vagina, and mammary glands. Roles of ovaries. Ovaries are involved in gametogenesis termed as oogenesis, which means it is a production of ova or eggs. Hormonogenesis, the production of female sex hormones, namely estrogen and progesterone. Let us now look at the role of the female reproductive system. It receives the sperms, provides suitable environment for the fertilization, it promotes development and growth of the fetus, and finally parturition, the childbirth. Mammary gland, which is involved in the lactation, which means the production of the milk. Fertility period in female. Starting from the puberty to the cessation of cyclical changes is termed as menopause. In a female, the gametogenesis will begin at the time of puberty and it will go on till the menopause where the cessation of gametogenesis take place. Ovaries are considered to be the primary sex organs in the case of females. It produces ova, which is by the process of oogenesis, and also secretes hormones. This is a schematic representation of the oogenesis happening in the females. You can see that oogonia. So this part is all happening in the fetal life. Right? The primary oocytes will be formed as a result of the mitosis of the oogonia that will be happening in the fetal life inside the uterus. And then the birth will be taking place here at this particular point, and you can see the first meiotic division begins within the uterus and completed prior to the ovulation. So ovulation will be taking place at the time of puberty. So here you need to understand that this process is beginning and then it will be completed only just before the ovulation, prior to the ovulation. So that is happening just before the puberty. So first meiotic division begins in the uterus and completed prior to the ovulation. Then you can see the secondary oocyte which is formed. The division is completed after fertilization. Only after fertilization the second meiotic division will be completed. So this will be happening in the time of an adulthood, right? So here the polar bodies will be also formed in this. Menstrual cycle. Changes in uterus, ovary and vagina which takes place once in 28 days. It is associated with cyclical discharge of blood, damaged endometrium in once in 28 days, which is referred to as the menstrual bleeding. Actually, every 28 days, the uterus will be preparing itself to receive the implant. So it is preparing itself to receive the implant, and when it is not used, when the fertilization is not happening, then all these preparations are going to be wasted. So that will be released in the form of the menstrual bleeding. Menstrual cycle includes the ovarian cycle, which means the changes which is happening in the ovaries once in 28 days. Uterine cycle, the changes that occurs in the uterus once in 28 days, and the vaginal cycle, the cyclical changes occurring in vagina. So all these three areas you will be seeing the changes during the menstrual cycle. So you can see that every 28 days changes will be happening in the ovaries, changes will be happening in the uterus, changes will be happening in the vaginal area. So these three different cycles are together known as a menstrual cycle. The duration of menstrual cycle is subjected to individual variations. 20 to 45 days is considered to be a normal range, which means that you cannot expect everyone to have a 28-day cycle. It can be within a range of 20 to 45, which is considered to be a normal range. Menstrual cycle of duration less than 20 days or more than 45 days is considered to be abnormal. So the individuals will have to consult the gynecologist if their menstrual cycle is less than 20 or more than 45, which is abnormal. Ovulation. Mature follicle, which is also called as a Graafian follicle, ruptures in response to high follicle stimulating hormone, which is FSH and LH, luteinizing hormone. FSH and luteinizing hormones, these are the anterior pituitary hormones. Secondary oocytes released from the ovary into the serous fluid of peritoneal cavity, and this process is called as ovulation, which means the secondary oocyte is released from the ovary into the peritoneal cavity, and that process is ovulation. So you can see here, these are the ovaries of, this is one side ovary, this is another one, and you can see the fallopian tube with the fimbriae and everything. So when the mature ovum from the ovary, which is called as a Graafian follicle, when it is released, the Graafian follicle, from that the ovum will be released. When the ovum is released into this space is the peritoneal cavity. So it will be released into the peritoneal cavity, then it will be picked up by the suction action or the suction force, which is done by the fallopian tube. So then it will be entering into the fallopian. So as soon as it is released from here, it is released here, it will be picked up by the fallopian tube, and then it will be going inside. That is the process of ovulation. And this particular picture on the right hand side shows the various stages of development. You can see that the mature ovum is called as a Graafian follicle. This is the Graafian follicle, and you can see the small one, the primordial follicle. This is very small. Then as it matures, you can see the size increases. This is a secondary follicle, and then finally it is forming the mature Graafian follicle. And this stage, you can see that there is ovulation. From the mature follicle, the ovum is released. Right? After that, the remaining part of the follicle will be forming the corpus luteum by accumulation of fat in it, and that is the yellow structure, which is called as a corpus luteum, which is having a hormonal function. Ovarian cycle. Primary follicle. You can see that the primary follicle is here, which is very small in structure. As it matures, the size increases. Secondary follicle is increasing. Then there is a space which is appearing, an antral space, that is the stage. And then after that, so that will be the Graafian follicle. And then there's the process of ovulation where the ovum is released. So if you look at the phase like this, if you take a 28-day cycle, exactly on the 14th day of the cycle, you can see that the ovulation will be happening. Right? Structural changes in the ovarian follicle during the ovarian cycle are correlated with the changes in the endometrium of the uterus during the uterine cycle. So these changes, what you're seeing right now in this slide, they are changes which is happening in the ovaries. From the primary follicle, it is forming the Graafian follicle. Then at the mid-cycle on 14th day, the ovum will be released by the process of ovulation. The remaining part, this part, the follicles, will be forming the corpus luteum, the yellow structure which is after the accumulation of cholesterol. Then this has endocrine function, and then finally it is having a life. It will undergo degeneration. It will be undergo degeneration and forms a structure called corpus albicans. So we will discuss about that in the next slides. Now let us see what is LH surge. At the time of ovulation, the levels of luteinizing hormone increases, which is called as LH surge. So you can see that at this particular point, the ovulation happens on 14th day. The ovulation happens if it is a 28-day cycle. A 28-day cycle, the 14th day, the ovulation will be occurring. So you can see that just before the ovulation, this is the basal levels of the hormone. So you can see here the LH level speaks up, the luteinizing hormone level speaks up just few hours before the ovulation, and this is called as LH surge. At the time of ovulation, the levels of luteinizing hormone increases, which is called LH surge, approximately 9 hours before the ovulation. And this is the most essential point. Approximately 9 hours before the ovulation, the LH surge is seen, the high levels of luteinizing hormone, and this is the responsible factor for the ovulation to achieve. Ovulation depends on the LH surge. That means if there is no LH surge, no ovulation will happen. So in this picture also you can appreciate that this is the LH surge, and if it is this line, this white line here, that is indicating the ovulation, right? If it is a 28-day cycle, a standard 28-day cycle, you are putting 14th day is the exact time of the ovulation. So that particular point is the time where the ovulation is happening. That means rupture of the Graafian follicle and ovum will be released into the peritoneal cavity. But just before that, approximately 9 hours before that, you can see that the luteinizing hormones will peak up, and also there is a peak of follicle stimulating hormone, and this you will be also seeing that corresponding plasma hormone levels, the estrogen levels are higher at that particular time just before the ovulation. You can see that this is the ovulation. Just before the ovulation, the estrogen levels are higher. At the same time, progesterone levels are on the basal level. But as soon as this particular ovulation occurs, you are seeing that the progesterone levels will increase. This is because if you see the previous picture, we have seen that once the ovum is released, the remaining part of the follicles will form a yellow structure called corpus luteum, and corpus luteum will be responsible for the production of this hormone, which is the progesterone. So this high levels of progesterone after the ovulation is an indication that ovulation has occurred or not. And progesterone, just like how you saw in other hormones like thyroid hormone, it is a thermogenic hormone. Thermogenic hormone means it can increase the basal metabolic rate. So if you measure the basal metabolic rate in a female in the early morning, and if you find that 0.5 degrees Celsius increase is seen in the body temperature, if she is expecting the ovulation to happen, it is a confirmatory test that the ovulation has occurred. So measuring the basal body temperature is one way to check whether the individual has ovulated, or to be more specific, if you check for the hormone levels of the individual, you will see that very high levels of progesterone will be seen after the ovulation. But before the ovulation, it is the basal level. But after the ovulation, you are seeing the high levels of hormone progesterone, because it is released from the corpus luteum, which will be formed only after ovulation. So this picture shows a comparison between ovarian cycle and uterine cycle. The picture what you see above, this is the ovarian cycle which we discussed in the previous slide, and this picture which you see below, this represents the uterine cycle. So this one will be happening in the ovaries and this will be happening in the uterus. Now let us look into this one by one. Here you can see that if it is a 28-day cycle, on the 14th day the ovulation will be occurring. 14th day the ovulation will be occurring, and those phases before the ovulation, this is called as a follicular phase, because these are all the follicles. So it is a follicular phase, and after the ovulation the next phase is called as a luteal phase, because corpus luteum is formed only after the ovulation. So after the ovulation you see this particular structure, it will be the yellow structure where the accumulation of fat will be there, and this is the structure which is responsible for the release of the hormone progesterone. And progesterone can increase the basal body temperature because it's a thermogenic hormone. So this phase, because of the presence of corpus luteum, the phase after the ovulation is referred as luteal phase, corpus luteum. So it is luteal phase. The phase before the ovulation is termed as follicular phase, because these are the follicles: primary follicle, secondary follicle, vesicular follicle, like that. So that is the one which you need to remember. So we have in the ovarian cycle, the follicular phase is before the ovulation and luteal phase is after the ovulation. Similarly, you need to compare the uterine cycle. Uterine cycle, we will be taking the whole uterine cycle. You can see that the first 5 days is called as a menstrual phase, where the actual menstrual bleeding will be occurring in the individual. Menstrual bleeding will be taking place at this particular phase, that is called as a menstrual phase. Then 5 to remaining days, you are seeing that it is called as a proliferative phase. Proliferative phase means slowly the uterus will be building up, the glands will be building up, the size of the uterus is increasing. And you can see that after the ovulation, right from 15th day onwards, the phase is called as a secretory phase. More secretions will increase, the glands will increase. So these are all the endometrial gland, the uterine glands. So all glands will be increasing its sizes, blood vessels will be richer, and it will be highly innervating. So the size from here, if you see, the size is increasing. That means the uterus is preparing for accommodating a new implant, right? So after the fertilization, so always every month the uterus will be preparing for the implantation. So that is what. So if fertilization does not occur, all these preparation is going to be wasted, and that will be continued as the menstrual flow. So that's what happening. So endometrial gland and uterine gland and also the blood vessels, everything will be increasing its sizes, the secretions will increase. So here it is called a secretory phase, because all these glands will be undergoing a large amount of secretion. And where here proliferative phase means it is a developing phase where it is building up the uterine mass. Endometrium, it is undergoing the cyclical changes which prepare it for the implantation of the fertilized ovum. Endometrium is the innermost lining. Uterus, if you see perimetrium, the outermost. Myometrium is made up of muscle. Endometrium is the innermost. So these are the functional layers. That is the stratum functionale. That is the one which is sloughed off at the time of menstruation. So that is the one which is sloughed off, and it contains the uterine glands. So you can appreciate the uterine glands here. These are the uterine glands. So this particular layer, which is the one which is lost along with the menstrual blood. So that particular layer is called as the stratum functionale, and it is supplied by the spiral artery. Spiral artery or the coil artery, you can see these are the highly coiled arteries which is supplying blood. And the basal layer is called as a stratum basale. Stratum basale, and that particular layer is retained during the menstruation. It is supplied by the straight basilar arteries. It is the source of cells for the regeneration of the functional layer. That means this layer will be retained. This layer will not be lost during the menstrual cycle, but only the upper layer which is sloughed off. The stratum functionale will be lost, but every time the cells, these cells will be dividing and it will be building up this layer. The last layer will be build up during the next cycle. So the basal layer or the stratum basale has that particular function, that it will be providing the cells for the regeneration of the functional layer. Now let us see the ovarian hormones and its action. Let us look at the functions of estrogen and progesterone. Actions of estrogen. Estrogen will have actions on ovaries, uterus, mammary gland, development of secondary sexual characteristics, effect on growth and development, and action on brain. We will be seeing it one by one. Action of estrogen on ovaries. At the time of puberty, it is involved in the growth of ovaries, brings about the follicular growth. In an adult, the estrogen will help in the development of Graafian follicle and the final maturation before ovulation. Estrogen increases the FSH receptors in the follicle. So this is also one of the important function. In the presence of estrogen, the FSH receptors, what is FSH? Follicle stimulating hormone receptors in the follicle will be increasing in number when there is presence of estrogen. That means more follicle FSH receptors are there. That means if follicles FSH is released, it can act more efficiently. Actions of estrogen on uterus. During puberty, it increases the amount of smooth muscle fibers and increases the size of the uterus. So uterus, at the time of puberty, the size of the uterus increases in size. It also increases the actin myosin quantity in the uterine muscle and increases the uterine contractility. Same like in the skeletal muscle, what you learn, the uterus also it contains the actin myosin quantity, which will be helping in the contraction, because the powerful contractions are required at the time of childbirth or parturition. It increases the excitability of myometrium. So estrogen, one of the function is that the excitability of the myometrium is increased. So if there is too much of estrogen during the pregnancy, there are chances that of higher risk of abortion, because it will increase the excitability of myometrium. It induces the synthesis of progesterone receptors in the endometrium. So it will also make sure that the progesterone receptors on the endometrium will be increased in presence of estrogen. Actions of estrogen during pregnancy. It increases the number of oxytocin receptors on the myometrium during the pregnancy. What is the role of oxytocin? Oxytocin is a hormone which is released from the posterior pituitary. It is synthesized in the hypothalamus, but it is released from the posterior pituitary, stored and released from the posterior pituitary. So it increases the number of oxytocin receptors on the myometrium during pregnancy. Estrogen also increases the length of smooth muscle fiber. Now let us see the action on mammary gland. It increases the duct system. The duct system increases, and also the branching. You can see the branching of the duct system will be happening. It increases the fat deposition, and also the size of the mammary gland will be increased in response to the estrogen. It also causes pigmentation of the areola, the brown pigmentation around the nipples, that's the areola. So that is because of the actions of estrogen. Actions of estrogen on secondary sexual characteristics. The voice remain high pitched. The female voice, they are having high pitch because of the action of the specific action on the vocal cords. Less body hair will be seen in females with more scalp hair. Action on adipose tissue, which means that the characteristic feminine appearance of fat distribution will be seen in the case of females. Actions of estrogen on growth and development. Estrogen causes growth of long bones, sudden linear growth. So this is what I was explaining in the beginning when I discussed about the puberty, because estrogen, it is having an important role in increasing the linear growth of long bones. That is the reason why the girls attains higher height, more height when compared to the similar age grouped boys. It's like in the same time, if it is a 12-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy, when they are growing at the time of puberty, the girls will become more taller when compared to the guys, because estrogen is having an effect by increasing the length of the long bones. After that it stops. So this is the kind of thing which is seen. It causes epiphysis to close. After that long bones, once it grows, then it will put a break to the epiphysis places will close, then the no longer the bones will be elongated. So that means this particular individual will not be able to grow further. So at the time of puberty, you will be seeing a drastic growth in the case of females. That is due to the action of estrogen on the long bones. And also it is having an effect that after that growth which has taken place, it also makes sure that the epiphysis will close. So it no longer will be able to elongate. It increases the protein metabolism. Influence on erythropoiesis. What is the influence of erythropoiesis? Here it is having an inhibitory effect on the erythropoiesis. That is why if you compare the males and the females, the RBC count is lower in the case of females. Mainly because one thing is that estrogen is having a kind of an inhibitory effect, but the testosterone in the case of males will stimulate the production of red blood cells. Increases the osteoblastic activity. What is an osteoblast? Osteoblasts are those cells which are bone forming cells. Bone forming cells. They are osteoblast. Osteoblastic activity will increase. The blood cholesterol is reduced, hence less susceptibility to myocardial infarction. Here also, this is also one of the important thing which you need to remember when you take majority of the cases of myocardial infarction. It is, if it is a pre-menopausal woman, before the menopause, the number might be lesser. In the case of females, the number of MI cases might be lesser. The myocardial infarction cases will be lesser because estrogen is having an important role to minimize the amount of blood cholesterol. So when they are not attained the menopause, they are not susceptible to the myocardial infarction, or less susceptible. So that's what the studies have shown. Actions on brain, it increases libido. Libido is the sexual drive towards the opposite sex. So that is the case in the case of the estrogen. Actions of progesterone. It does not have any action on the ovaries. This is a very important point. It does not act on the ovaries. It will be action only on the progesterone, will be having action only on the uterus. It decreases the excitability of the myometrium. When I discussed about the action of estrogen on myometrium, it increases the excitability. But here, this is very important point to remember, the progesterone decreases the excitability of the myometrium. Remember, the estrogen will be also increasing the number of receptors. What receptors? Number of progesterone receptors on the myometrium. So estrogen itself is a hormone which brings about increased excitability of the uterus, but in the other hand, it is facilitating the action of the progesterone. So, but the progesterone will be formed after the ovulation. So after the ovulation, we don't want the uterus to be highly excitable because there are high chances of fertilization to occur and an implant will be coming to the uterus. So at that particular moment, the progesterone will make sure that the uterus is calm and quiet. It is not excitable. So that is one of the function of progesterone. Progesterone, gestation, it is helping in the gestation period. Causes secretion of endometrial gland. So progesterone is also having an important role in increasing the secretions of the endometrial gland. On the mammary gland, it also acts on the growth of the alveoli and the duct system, decreasing the excitability of the myometrium by decreasing the number of estrogen receptors. So whenever myometrium is like action on myometrium is happening, it will be decreasing the number of estrogen receptors. So here you can see that estrogen receptors, the number itself is reduced. That means estrogen will not be able to act much on the endometrium. So endometrium cannot be excitable, it will be silent. So that's one of the important function by which progesterone will make sure that the endometrium is less excitable. And it's a thermogenic hormone. This I discussed on the part when I discussed on the ovulation, that it is one of the hormone which can be used for the detection or test for ovulation, because progesterone will bring about increase in the basal body temperature. So that by measuring a basal body temperature or by measuring the amount of the levels of progesterone in blood, one can identify that she is already ovulated. So this will be used like in the family planning also. Secondary amenorrhea during pregnancy and its physiological basis. What do you mean by amenorrhea? Amenorrhea is a term which is given for the stoppage of menstrual cycle. Here it's a secondary amenorrhea, means it's a after the menstrual cycle has begun in an individual. During pregnancy there is a stoppage of menstrual cycle. That's an indication that the individual is pregnant. Now let us see what's the physiological basis for that. That means when the individual is a normal fertile individual who is undergoing menstrual cycle every month, suddenly the menstrual cycle stops when she is pregnant. And what is the basis for this? FSH and LH secretion from the anterior pituitary will be low because of the negative feedback effects of estrogen and progesterone that is released from the corpus luteum of the pregnancy. Remember, after the ovulation, the remaining part of the Graafian follicle, the remaining follicular segments will form a structure which is called as corpus luteum, the yellow structure which is secreting the estrogen and progesterone, right? So that particular structure will continue as corpus luteum of pregnancy. Otherwise it will be having only a lifespan of about 10 days. But in the case of corpus, in case the individual is pregnant, this will be remaining as a corpus luteum of pregnancy for a longer duration, right? So that is called as a corpus luteum of pregnancy, that will continuously be releasing estrogen and progesterone, and that amount of estrogen and progesterone will be inhibiting through negative feedback. It will be inhibiting the FSH and LH. If there is FSH and LH stops, the ovulation also will stop, absence of menstrual cycle, and that condition is called as secondary amenorrhea. And it is the secondary amenorrhea is one of the pregnancy is one of the cause for secondary amenorrhea. So this is the fertilization which is happening. So you can see that when the sperms are deposited into the vagina, it will be going up and then it will be going into the uterine tube. After the ovulation, when the ovum is released, it is taken up by to the fallopian tube, and it is this particular site, the ampulla, is the site at which the sperm will unite with the ovum. So the fertilization, the site of fertilization under normal conditions will be this particular space or ampulla. That means sperms has to travel all the way to reach the ovum. So it's only one ovum, but millions of sperms will be moving towards, and then finally only one ovum will be get to pierce the particular coverings of the ovum and then get to fertilize. So that is how fertilization will be occurring. Fusion of spermatozoa and the ovum. So you can see that the viability of the gametes, the sperm, after 48 hours after ejaculation, so till 48 hours it can survive in the female genital tract, and in the case of ovum it is within 12 to 24 hours after the ovulation. So that is the viability range which is mentioned. sperm undergo a process called capacitation, whereby the motility of the spermatozoa is enhanced. So initially it may not be having much of motility, but the complete motility is attained after it is released into the female genital tract. The motility of the spermatozoa is enhanced, and that process, various process by which the like motility is undergoing the sperm, and that is called as a capacitation. The motility of the spermatozoa is enhanced. Some membrane proteins are removed, making spermatozoa membrane more fragile in preparation of the fertilization. Only one sperm eventually fertilizes with the egg, and that will be undergoing an acrosome reaction. It will be having a head region with the enzyme, which is the acrosome. So here you can see the head region will be then dissolving the layers, and then it will be entering, and finally the nucleus will be ejected inside the ovum, and that process is called as the acrosomal reaction. So acrosomal reaction and sperm penetration, you can see here also. An ovulated oocyte is encapsulated by the corona radiata and zona pellucida. Zona pellucida is the layer. Hyaluronidase, so that is the enzyme that is enabling the spermatozoa to dissolve and penetrate the corona radiata. So this is the zona pellucida layer. You can see that. Then the acrosomal reaction will be happening, and finally the sperm nucleus will be entering, the head will be entering. Spermatozoa then binds to the zona pellucida and undergoing the acrosomal reactions. Spermatozoa released acrosomal enzymes. Acrosomal enzymes will be released, which digest holes through the zona pellucida, creating a path to the oocyte membrane. Only one sperm penetrates the oocyte, and it will be monospermy. Otherwise what will happen is many sperms will enter, it will be a difficult situation. So in this case it is a monospermy only. Even though millions of sperms are there, only one will be able to penetrate the membrane of the ovum. Rest everything might die eventually. Cleavage and blastocyst formation. The zygote undergoes multiple mitotic divisions, and the numbers like 2, 4, 8 cell stages will be achieved, and this cleavage produces small cells within a high surface volume, enhancing nutrient and uptake and disposal of the waste. 72 hours after the fertilization, the 16 cell condition is called as morula, which is formed, and then it differentiates into blastocyst, and it's the blastocyst getting then implanted. Implantation. In the early stage of pregnancy, blastocyst adheres to the uterine wall. Blastocyst will be secreting a very important hormone, which is called as a HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin, and it is a HCG which can be used in the detection of the pregnancy diagnostic test. In the pregnancy diagnostic test, in the kit will be having the HCG determinant. So that is the antibodies against the HCG will be there in that kit. So if the individual's urine is tested, the urine will contain the HCG. So HCG will be going and attaching, binding to the antibodies, HCG antibodies, and it will be, the reaction will be a color reaction. So that is how the individual will be able to test whether she is pregnant or not. So that is used as a pregnancy diagnostic test, the presence of human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, which is released from the blastocyst. HCG signals the corpus luteum not to degenerate. This is very, very important. Now, how the corpus luteum in the uterus will know whether the pregnancy has occurred or not? Because I told that normally the corpus luteum will have a lifespan of 10 days. But when the individual becomes pregnant, this will not be degenerated in 10 days. Corpus luteum will remain as corpus luteum of pregnancy. So the question is, how the corpus luteum will know whether the pregnancy has occurred or not? It is through the HCG. So whenever the pregnancy has occurred and the blastocyst is formed, it will definitely secrete the HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin, and that is the one which gives the signal to the corpus luteum not to degenerate. So once it receives this signal, corpus luteum will be continuing as corpus luteum of pregnancy. So it will not get degenerated. Corpus luteum secretes progesterone and estrogen to maintain the pregnancy. So that is the various stages which is happening from day 1 onwards, the fertilization. And this is also the formation of placenta. Placenta will be developed after 6 weeks of pregnancy. So all this till the development of placenta, the corpus luteum of pregnancy is the major source of hormones for the uterus. So that is there. So placenta, once it is developed, it will be taken, or the hormonal control will be taken over by the placenta. Ovarectomy before 6 weeks of pregnancy can lead to abortion. Why? This is a very important question to think about. Why ovarectomy before 6 weeks of pregnancy can lead to abortion? Here the reason being, it takes 6 weeks for the placenta to form. Before that, it is the corpus luteum which is situated inside the ovary, which is supporting, which is giving the hormonal support for the uterus. So if you make ovarectomy, removal of ovaries before 6 weeks of pregnancy, the placenta is not developed. In that case, the hormonal support of the uterus was provided by the corpus luteum, and we are removing the corpus luteum. So there is no hormonal support for the corpus luteum, for the uterus, and thereby it can lead to abortion. That's a very important point to note. Hormonal changes associated with pregnancy. Human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, which is secreted by the syncytiotrophoblasts cells. It helps in the maintenance of the corpus luteum of pregnancy, which then secretes the estrogen and progesterone. So maintenance of the corpus luteum as corpus luteum of pregnancy is the sole responsibility of the HCG. FSH and LH secretion will be low due to the negative feedback by the estrogen and progesterone and absence of menstrual cycle. As a result of pregnancy, we call it as secondary amenorrhea. We have already discussed the physiological basis in the previous slide also. Human chorionic somatomamotropin, which is also called HCS. Human chorionic somatomamotropin is also known as a placental lactogen or human chorionic growth hormone. Placental lactogen or human chorionic growth hormone. This is synthesized by the placental syncytiotrophoblasts cells. It has structural similarity to the growth hormone. That is why it is called as a human chorionic growth hormone, because it is having a structural similarity with the growth hormone. It has growth stimulating action. It is the maternal growth hormone of pregnancy. For the mothers, it is the maternal growth hormone during the pregnancy. It decreases the utilization by the mother, and most of the glucose will be channelized for the growing fetus. So whatever mother consume, most of the glucose which is taken up by the mother will be channelized towards the growing fetus. So it is facilitating that glucose transport. It will also ensure that the sufficient supply of glucose for the placenta and fetus is achieved. So that's one of the important functions of HCS. And it causes lipolysis in mother, and free fatty acids are again diverted to the growing fetus. So it has got so many important functions. It is the maternal growth hormone of the mother. Now let us see what is the clinical significance of HCS levels. The amount of HCS is proportionate to the size of the placenta, which means that if the individual is having a healthy placenta, she will be having the HCS, normal amount of HCS levels. Suppose if there is a low levels of HCS hormone in the blood, that indicates that there is something wrong with the placenta. HCS levels will fall. It will go to a zero level when there is a death of the fetus. Right? In the utero, if the fetus die, under diagnostic test, when they see there is no heartbeat, which is seen in the ultrasound, when it is done, no heartbeat will be seen, then they will be also checking the HCS levels in the blood of the mother, then it will be seen to be completely zero. That shows that the placenta is not functional. Relaxin. Relaxin is another hormone. In the early part of the pregnancy, it is produced from the corpus luteum of pregnancy. It softens the cervix in preparation for the cervical dilation at the time of parturition. So this is a kind of hormone which is facilitating the parturition or the childbirth by softening the cervix. It loosens the connective tissue between the pelvic bones. Menopause, the time that marks the end of menstrual cycles. It is diagnosed after missing the menstrual period for an year. If the individual, she is reaching almost 50 years of age, when she misses her menstrual period, and almost for an year, if she doesn't have the menstrual cycle, then it is a kind of diagnosis that she has achieved the menopause. It can happen between 40 to 50, that range. So each individual, there will be individual variations, but majority of the people will be reaching towards 50. Ovaries are depleted of the follicles. There is no ovulation. Consequent decreases in the synthesis of the ovarian hormone. There will be also decreased or absent physiological effects of estrogen and progesterone. Effects of decreased female hormones. What are the effects? Hot flashes, emotional symptoms, disrupted sleep. So these are some of the symptoms seen in menopause. Osteoporosis, easy breakage of the bones. Atrophy of the vaginal wall and breast. Loss of libido. Libido is the sexual interest or sexual drive. So this picture indicates the hormonal changes associated with menopause. In extreme cases, a hormone replacement therapy is also provided to the individual, because in some individuals the kinds of symptoms and conditions might be much worse than the others. So these are the references, and thank you for listening.